Good evening, folks. Thank you for joining me for another live stream. I have eased off on them lately because there's a little rumour that it's very easy to upset the government nowadays. And being somebody with an unrestrained gob, I thought it might be wise to take it a little easy to avoid a knock on the door from the gendarmerie. Anyway, I couldn't resist because some things have to be said. And today I am being joined by my very own Victor Meldrew in the Sun, Jack Lobb, who has shamelessly and without reservation and without a hint of guilt abandoned the United Kingdom to go and suffer in the sun in the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Good evening, Jack. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm well. I could say I just don't believe it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, first of all, how guilty do you feel for having abandoned us in the motherland, the land of democracy, freedom of speech, fair play, law and order, justice, to go and live in the sun? Do you feel bad about it?
Well, of course, I presume all of those freedoms that you just spoke about must have been freedoms well in the past, because I don't actually remember any of them. And as time goes on, restrictions on all of those supposed freedoms are being whittled down every single day.
Mhm.
The party for truth, fairness, socialism, the working man, seems to be worse than some Tories, in actual fact. And it's interesting. I've heard of a phrase recently which actually sums up the whole thing so well, and that's it. That is, it doesn't matter if they're right wing or left wing; they're part of the same bird.
Mm. Yes, of course. Well, um, you are aware of the term that was used by oh, I've forgotten his name now, where he was a bit more blunt and said they're both cheeks of the same bum. To be perfectly honest, which was a little bit more blunt, but you are absolutely right. If you have had the misfortune to watch Parliament live at any time in the last few weeks, in that little time that they have been in attendance, you'd be forgiven for not being able to tell one from the other because the hundred and something or so wets that are the fragmented remainders of what was once the Conservative Party are not Conservatives. They do not raise a voice in objection to anything. They do not stand for the people. They do not stand for small government, law and order, sovereignty, borders. They might as well just take their rosettes off and join the Labour Party. And here we are now. And the topic of this video is reflecting on Labour's first 8 weeks in power. What are your first observations?
Well, I've got many observations. Obviously, I think one of the hot topics at the moment, which has actually, I think, upset virtually every uh, thinking person in the UK, is this ridiculous change in the tax benefits that has disallowed the heating allowance for pensioners.
Mhm.
I think it's going to save something like £2 billion a
It's
year.
less than that. I think it's about 1.7 billion.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that not cutting the winter fuel allowance for pensioners would have risked collapsing the economy, but giving away 11.7 billion to other countries to help them with their climate efforts won't.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, you've stolen a piece of my thunder there, because, of course, I was going to say this. Um, and how the leader of the House of Commons, I can't remember the ghastly woman's name, but she was saying that by not taking away the pensioners to £300 a year would have risked a run on the pound. I don't think
Hmm.
I've ever heard anything so ludicrous in my life.
Hmm.
Um, well, it beggars belief, actually. And of course, it's also two two-faced, really, because the members of parliament have huge allowances that they're allowed to claim, which includes a heating allowance. The heating allowance doesn't necessarily cover their own personal home, of which they usually have many. And of course, they're given allowances for a second home in they find it too difficult to their constituencies every evening. It'd be interesting to know how much that costs. I've no
Uh,
idea. I'm sure somebody.
okay. Well, I can tell you that Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, who was justifying the cut in the winter fuel allowance, is claiming for this winter 3,800, I believe, for her own energy costs.
Well, I know. Well, that's right. Well, something that I was reading about was Rachel Reeves and her husband. Her husband is a senior civil servant. Between them, they rake in salaries, something like £370,000 a year. They get pension contributions from the government of just over £96,000 a year. And as you so rightly say, she actually, well, you didn't say this, but I know that in 2023, she actually claimed £214,000 in personal expenses. And she's telling us that giving a pensioner 200 quid to pay something towards their heating bills is extravagant. Well, it's a joke. And of course, all right, strip away this money from the pensioners, it saves 2 billion. But what other costs are going to be incurred because of this stripping away of their £200? How many pensioners are going to suffer serious illnesses because of cold induced traumas? They're going to have chest infections. They're going to, collapse for all sorts of different reasons because they're suffering from hypothermia. So, of course, they're going to be calling in ambulances, doctors, nurses. None of that seems to have been factored in.
No, no, absolutely. They haven't thought about anything. It is literally almost like a war of malicious war against the very people who were their core supporters in the past. They have, I believe, lost their core voter base now, and they will, as time goes by, be resorting to more desperate measures. We've got the loss of the winter fuel allowance. We've also got VAT on independent schools. 600,000 of them, pupils in independent schools. They hope to raise again just under 2 billion from that. I think it's 1.7 billion. But there is a strike point.
Billion, you said, yes.
Yeah, 1.7 billion, I believe. But there's a
And yeah,
strike.
but that's all very well, isn't it? But actually, many parents now won't be able to afford to send their
Mhm,
children to private schools. So
mhm.
what are they going to do? And how many tens of thousands of students is that going to lump into the state school system,
Well,
which can't cope with the pupils they've got already?
there's 100,000 already earmarked to be pulled out of independent schools, and the strike point at which the gains from VAT will be negated by the loss in less revenue, not just from the VAT, but from all the other factors. Because as pupils leave independent schools, they'll be sacking teachers, closing schools down, all of the other all of the other expenses that goes in the economy and generates money. But the strike point is between 100 and 150,000 pupils. let's just say it is at the high end, 150,000. I think they'll reach that point before the end of next year, meaning that they will have destroyed independent education for the main part for everyday people. And everyday people do make up 90% of the pupils who go to independent schools. They're not the wealthy, they're the children of families who go without holidays, work two jobs, make sacrifices to give their children a better future. They're now being punished. So when a child comes out of independent education, average school fees are 18,000, so the VAT is 3,600. So when a child leaves independent education, they lose that 3,600. Plus, there's the additional 6 or 7,000 it will cost when they enter a state school. And in many of these areas, the state schools are already struggling. So they are going to have a serious problem, because it's all well and good for them to be saying, we're going to recruit more teachers, we're going to recruit more police, but nobody wants to do these jobs. Who on earth wants to be a teacher and be sat children around teaching them about all sorts of perversions that are now on the school curriculum that they daren't raise a voice against because they will be struck out and not allowed to teach again? Who on earth wants to join the police force to turn a blind eye to violent crime because of demographic pressure, and actually go and arrest people because they said Mrs. Brown did it with the iron bar in the kitchen, I think? This is the Labour Party for you.
Well, yes, talking about there's policing, there's another interesting topic for another day, and the way the police now really don't do much policing, but that's another story.
Oh, absolutely. And here's an interesting one, because there has been a steady stream of millionaires leaving the UK in the year 18 months before the election in expectancy of a Labour government, anticipation of a Labour government. This has accelerated since the election dramatically. This week, the Financial Times published an article, a report by UBS, a Swiss bank, which predicts that by 2028, 500,000 millionaires will have left the UK. You've also got this new policy, many of them are heading to Italy, because Italy has introduced a flat tax policy. It's €100,000 no matter how much you make. And before this government actually points a finger at Italy, we need to keep in mind that despite the tax haven rhetoric that we keep hearing from these politicians, the one of the biggest tax havens in the world belongs to the UK, and that's Gibraltar. And Gibraltar did also have a flat tax, and it was much lower than €100,000. I believe they've changed it now. It's been a while since I've checked what it is, but definitely it's significantly lower than it is here. So we're in a connected world. It's very difficult to stop these wealthy people from just moving their money and more importantly, their generation of money to other parts of the world.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually follow your thinking now, because, yeah, Britain actually does have more tax havens than any other country in the world. So why a millionaire actually would decide to leave the country, I've no idea really, because most of his money he would have in a tax haven, an offshore tax haven, anywhere in the world. So he, or whatever tax regime the government might bring in to tax the mega wealthy are quite easily able to avoid paying that tax.
To a point, yes, but keep in mind that in accordance with British tax law, if you live in the UK, they demand to know everything that you have anywhere in the world, and if you keep that from them, you're breaking the law effectively. But nevertheless, thousands are leaving, and that means that the the people, the number of people who they set their sights on, or as Keir Starmer said, those with the broadest shoulders, they're all leaving. And I don't think people realize what the 1% actually means. Because if we're talking about the top 1%, not the top 10%, the top 1%, most people think in terms of hundreds of millions or billions, but it's actually not. To qualify to be in the top 1% in the UK, you need an income of 184,000 a year pre-tax, or assets of 2.4 million or more. That puts you in the top 1%. That's a lot, but it's not in the super rich category, if you like. And many of these people are leaving. And 1% of a country, all right, let's just say we are 70 million. We probably are unofficially, but officially I think we're 67. But 1% of our country is less than 700,000 people. If we have a few hundred thousand leave, who are they going to tax? What are they going to do? Unless they resort to drastic measures, which is actually stealing assets from people. And that's not as ridiculous as it may sound.
Well, I agree. And it goes on, doesn't it? Um, another thing that gets to me actually is the green taxes. We've got green levies on the fuel that we use,
Mhm.
green levies on using airports, green levies on the price of tickets. And I'm sure there are many other green levies that don't instantly spring to mind. And from what I understand, these green levies bring in the UK around about 53 uh, billion. Well, where is that money spent? Because it's certainly not spent on renewable energy.
Uh, well, it's actually it's actually obscene the amount of money that is raised from people in the name of green energy, and green levies and so on and so forth. But effectively, everyday people are struggling, and a lot of it is being channeled into those who are profiting from anything that is within the green industry: solar farms, wind farms, etc., etc. But at the same time, as a result of this, we are losing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland that we badly need. Just up the road from me here in Northampton, there are plans to take 3.5 square miles of farmland to make one of the largest solar farms in the country. And this is not just going to be the only one. I couldn't work out how many acres there is in 3.5 square miles, but it is literally thousands of acres. And those acres, just on a quick search of different food types, could feed thousands of people. And in the UK, we produce less than 50% of the food that we need. And rather than increasing it, because at 50%, should we, God forbid, end up in a major conflict, there'll be mass starvation in this country. To be able to survive, we need to be north of 75%. And instead of our food output increasing, it's decreasing and we're losing farmland. And yet there's no provision for solar farms on industrial estates, on new buildings, or up and down the sides of motorways and roads and so on and so forth. Why are we losing farmland? But these people who are part of the in crowd are making a fortune, absolute fortune. Not sure. Have you ever seen the foundations of a solar turbine, of a wind turbine? Sorry,
Oh God, yes.
it's
Uh,
800 cubic meters of concrete with steel. That land is poisoned forever for all intents and purposes.
Absolutely. And then, of course, when these turbines fail, which they do quite often, um, they're almost indestructible. They're the remnants of these wind turbines, which are huge. The blades are huge, made of carbon fiber and all sorts of plasticky stuff. Um, all of this material has to be buried in landfill somewhere. It just becomes another environmental catastrophe.
Yeah,
It's a bit like this uh, the way they're striving for us now to get rid of our internal combustion engines and move over to electric powered cars. Well, it's very interesting actually. If anybody really looks into it, the absolute devastation to the environment that actually pulling the stuff out of the ground to make these huge batteries does to the environment and the individuals that are actually pulling these noxious substances out of the ground. And of course, the supply of the materials to make these batteries isn't finite. There's a limited amount. I can't remember. You'll probably know the name of the main ingredients into these batteries. Can't think of the name of it offhand.
Y-
Um,
yes. It's cobalt. Um,
Cobalt. There's a limited resource of cobalt. What are they going to do when they've run out of cobalt? And somewhere in Europe, I can't remember which country it is now, it's Romania or Hungary or somewhere like that, where they were going to build a massive open pit mine to mine this cobalt. The local population are absolutely up in arms about it and fighting tooth and nail to stop them doing it.
well, first of all, it could be argued that EVs are basically they know that they won't work. They just won't. But they are misdirection to take everybody's cars from them because ICEs are being taken out of production as fast as they possibly can and taken away and being crushed or sent abroad or wherever. And in the meantime, if you look now in the UK and you're looking for a car less than 5 years old, less than 50,000 miles, for example, um, without paying ridiculous sums, you struggle now. You really struggle to find a car now because they are being, as the sale of petrol vehicles has fallen, then obviously used cars coming into the market is also falling. And of course, from the 1st of January this year, they introduced the zero emission vehicle mandate. So in the UK, manufacturers must sell 22% of their total sales must be zero emission, and that will rise on a sliding scale to 80% by 2030. They can't achieve this, and this is just the first year. So, what some manufacturers have done is they've cut their production of petrol vehicles so that they can balance it out with the falling sales of EVs because the sales of EVs are falling because people just don't want them.
Well, they
And
can't afford them for one thing.
yeah, and then it's just not practical because otherwise they'll get fined £15,000 for each ICE that they sell above the 78% quota. And this is just the first year. And at the same time, you've got the major manufacturers, VW, not sure if you're aware, one of their cars, EVs, caught fire on a cargo ship a few months ago. And EVs, when they catch fire, you just can't put them out. And it sunk the ship with 4,000 cars on it. And VW have basically abandoned all but one or two EVs now. Mercedes is going down the same path. They've withdrawn one or two models. Some of their cars have had serious recall issues. They have announced that they're going to be producing ICEs well into the next decade. So the writing is on the wall. What will happen is in some point in the future, it will become clearly obvious that EVs are just lemons. People who have hold of them at the time will suddenly find that their value of their car has plummeted and they can't get rid of it. The infrastructure will collapse because the companies will pull out. and people won't be able to find a petrol car to replace it. I can see catastrophe as a result of this ridiculous experiment, to be honest.
Yes, well, exactly. And of course, the people, some of the people it hits worse, of course, are people in rural communities. They're on the lowest wages possible, generally speaking, and they can't afford these cars in the first place. So, and the rural bus services are virtually non-existent. So, how they're actually meant to get to and from work, you are going to decolonize rural Britain.
Yeah, and they're also in living in fear of pay per mile, which is being mentioned more and more because they are looking at introducing pay per mile. And that, again, who will it hit the most? It will hit people living in rural areas. What are you supposed to do if you need, if you have a boot full of whether it's shopping or products or what, or something you're going to show a client or whatever? What, how are you supposed to take that on a bus? And if it's hard enough getting on and off a bus in most urban areas in the UK now, because you're hindered because you need your stab proof vest. You need to have your your phone somewhere where somebody on a on electric bicycle is not going to fly down the road and grab it from your hand. You need eyes in the back of your head. How are you supposed to carry anything with you?
Well,
I,
you're not, are you? It's impossible.
mm. uh, Hello, Ray. Richard Vobes does a blog on YouTube. He's stated 27,000 acres down the southeast of England has been allocated for solar panels on arable farmland, and that's only one location. I quite rightly believe that. I did do the calculation. How many acres is in 3.5 square miles, which is up the road? I don't think, I'm not sure if it's that much, but this is up and down the country. This is happening now, and we have Mr. Ed Miliband, the champion of small man syndrome, who is desperate. If he could charge CO2 tax for us breathing when we walk down the street, he would do. But once again, as Nigel Farage quite rightly said, at the election, we didn't vote in new leaders. We voted in new middle management, and they answer to the puppeteers who tell them what to do. People need to see that we're uh, under control, the control of a uniparty in the UK, and I would imagine that many of the people who voted for these people, not that Labour got that many votes, they got far less than 2019, which was already far less than 2017. In fact, in 2019, it was considered that their vote had collapsed. And yet this year, they got even less. It's simply because so many people, quite rightly, were disgusted by the Conservative Party. They stayed at home, and here we have the Labour Party, who got less than 34% of the vote, who have 66% of the seats in Parliament. These are the very same people, and you know how cantankerous and how angry Remainers are, don't you, Jack? Of course.
I
Uh,
do know this.
yes. Now, the referendum in 2016 was 52% for leaving, 48% for remaining, and the
And what was the
Remainers.
percentage of the total vote, of the potential total vote?
I think it was about 17 million people voted. I think
What? How many people?
about 17 million. I think.
17 million.
I think
Out of
so.
a potential how many?
Uh, must be upwards of 40 million.
Yeah, exactly. So really, it wasn't even truly representative of the voting
Well,
population.
I'll have to check because I could be wrong, and you know what happens. Uh,
This happens quite often, of course.
I'll have to check, um, but I can't find the figures here somewhere. I'll have to take a look. But it was so 20. Sorry, no, 20, 28 million, 15.188 million to leave, 13.266 to remain. That's just in England. That's just in England. So it was a large portion. And yet, for the remainers, they're not happy with that. And yet, the very same people don't raise an argument that we have got this Marxist nutter pulling the strings on less than 34% of the
Well,
vote.
I think many do actually raise an eyebrow and say things.
Only,
Uh,
only
I
quietly
think
in case
most
they get a knock on the door.
thinking people now, they do realise that the government doesn't really run the country anyway. It's big corporations that run the country. We talk about freedom of the press. Well, the press is controlled by um, a couple of mass media organizations, and those mass media organizations themselves are then in turn controlled by huge investment concerns like BlackRock and that other old, wizened old purveyor of economic doom and gloom, whose name escapes me just at the moment. But everything is controlled by a very few mega corporations. And of course, the MPs in general, and it doesn't matter which side of the house they might sit on, they're all quite happy with this. I mean, most of them go into politics from relatively modest means, and they all come out bloody millionaires. Well, I'm sure I can't work out how they do it. I don't know if you all know how they do it.
Spoken like a true member of the far right. Absolutely, absolutely. And Charlie Drake says, and good evening, Charlie. Starvation of us, no more food, homegrown foods. Oh, absolutely. And we mentioned smoking earlier on. Now, there are many people out there, I've seen them in the comments. I hate smoking, and yes, they shouldn't be allowed to smoke, etc. What's going to happen when the next step is you're not allowed to eat meat in public? What about if we're not allowed to eat pork in public because it may offend people? And for those who are the vegans who live on genetically modified weeds, you know the type, normally quite drawn from being undernourished, they're sort of stick thin and they live on, I don't know, whatever they live on, genetically modified weeds. That's all I can say.
Fava beans, I think it is.
Sorry.
Fava beans.
Yes.
Chianti.
Now, again, they'll probably be cheering, yes, you shouldn't eat meat. But the minute it affects them, which it will do, because it's not about smoking, it's not about meat, it's not about minorities, it's not about uh, the different phobias that we've discussed in the past. It is about Marxism, total control. It is about the elite and their friends treading down everybody else and making sure they do as they are told. Politics of resentment executed with malice, not just in the UK, but throughout the Western world. But unfortunately, these are little more than political Bond figures. They're like the Bond criminals. They really, really are. And it always goes wrong. As you know, the night before last, what happened in the election in Germany? AfD um, increased their vote by, I think, 50% from the last time. And the current party, their voter base collapsed. We're seeing the rise of the right throughout Europe. We are seeing rebellion. And if the more they try to stamp people down, the more people will rise up and fight back. Because whether it's an individual, collection of individuals, or an entire administration, anyone who has underestimated the resolve and the strength and the determination of people um, has, if they're lucky, lived to regret it, but normally they haven't lived long enough to regret it.
Well, people are getting tired of seeing these huge inequalities in life, aren't they? And of course, they're always disappointed with parties like the Labour Party here. I mean, one wonders why, in times of financial hardship for a lot of people in the UK, the supermarkets, Tesco's being the worst offender amongst all of them, are making mega profits. They've never made so much money. Tesco's famous marketing phrase is every little helps. Well, I suppose that means every little bumper profit forecast that we make helps. They made over £1 billion last year, and they're telling us that they're cutting prices as hard as they can. And of course, the main way they cut any prices is to reduce what they're paying their suppliers. They actually pare back the profits that the farmers can make on anything.
Mm.
So they all wonder why the farmers aren't making any money. They wonder why the farmers are getting into these ridiculous systems, as we spoke about earlier, of putting solar farms on their land instead of growing crops. The farmers are even, there's even a scheme now where farmers are growing wild flowers instead of edible crops on their land, and they're being subsidized to do that. I mean,
Yes, that was down to Boris. He signed some agreement for 30% of land to be set aside to grow wildflowers and weeds and different things on them. And the is it the Forestry Commission? One of the major landowners that has so much land that it rents to farmers is actually kicking farmers off and planting flowers on the land that would be used to grow food. This is how ridiculous it is getting now.
It's
It's
absolute,
beyond a
it's
joke.
absolute madness. But anyway, back to supermarkets for a second. These supermarkets, they need to be taxed more highly because they're taking the proverbial out of the population by claiming to be offering such fantastic prices and every year making more and more profit, which actually then would lead me on to the water companies, water and sewerage companies, who make not only make billions or hundreds of millions of pounds profit a year, they're owned by generally by foreign companies. They're not actually owned by UK companies. So the profits they make are taken out of the country anyway. The whole thing stinks, actually. I can't really put it any more succinctly than that. And then when the water companies are told that they're going to be taxed more highly because of their profits, they say, oh, well, we're not going to have enough money to invest in renewing pipelines and increasing the amount of sewerage farms that we're constructing to look after the effluent that we're currently continually pouring into the rivers and into the sea, which actually strikes me as a little strange because I know for the last 40 years or more that I can remember, water companies have always been saying every year that they're spending more and more on water pipelines to stop leakages. They're spending more and more on sewerage plants to stop effluent going into the watercourses. But all of this is absolute bunkum because it's never actually happened. And how is it that the directors of these water companies keep paying themselves masses, huge bonuses of millions of pounds when their companies are failing in every aspect of their operational activities?
Absolutely. Firstly, sod off. I'm not getting alerts. if that's on your YouTube alerts, if you're subscribed, you need to click on the little bell, and then it will notify you when I go live. But um, having said that, I haven't been live for a while because under the current climate, I thought, um, taking into account that I allegedly have an unrestrained gob, that it was wise to ease off a little bit on the live streams, because I really don't want to knock on the door by the gendarmerie, because, to use my familiar phrase, because I said I think it was Mrs. Brown in the kitchen with the steel pipe, which I would like to continue to say, because that is our right. When you see a car crash, do you not go out and think, well, I think it was the ginger guy driving too fast who jumped the lights and did this? Well, if you were to apply that to a situation involving a certain demographic, then suddenly you're far right and it's a crime. Where is the logic in that? And I would like to see the Starmer approved version of Cluedo based on that, how that would work, to be perfectly honest. But again, uh, first 8 weeks of power, Labour, my thoughts are literally is, I've forgotten who said this in the 70s, over-governed, over-borrowed, overtaxed, and there's another one which I've forgotten off.
Over here.
Could be. Says he who shamelessly left the UK to suffer in the sun. Mind you, I do have to say, for those of you who are thinking about moving over to the sun, it all sounds good, but do you really want to be somewhere where people are walking around in their shorts and their loud t-shirts, happy, licking their ice creams? It pisses me off. I just want to take their ice cream and shove it in their face, but that's me. But first 8 weeks, what are your observations of what they've done to this country?
What you're asking? Who are you asking?
I'm asking you.
Oh, you're asking me.
I'm
Well, I
asking
thought I'd
you.
said, well, everything they've done has been done against the common man. It's absolutely frightening. Um, what have they done? They've attacked the old age pensioners. They've attacked the sort of middle classes trying to get better educations for themselves. But all of this is going to have the adverse effect to what supposedly they were hoping to achieve. I mean, either they haven't thought it through at all, they're too stupid to realize what the end result will be, or it's a plan to to bring on exactly those terrible results that will arise. It really is totally frightening, actually. Because I just it's a bit off the subject about what Labour have done in the first 100 days, because they haven't done an awful lot actually as yet. But how is it that you can knock back £200 a year for the pensioners and their heating, but you're paying £350 a day for a member of the House of Lords to sit in the upper chamber?
And
I mean,
sleep.
how does that work? It can't possibly be fair or right. It's an
No,
absolute nonsense.
it's an absolute disgrace. But just to put things in perspective a little bit, um, figures that you won't hear from either member of the Uni Party is that their the money that they take from the public, uh, for and that literally goes out the coffers for net zero per year is 30 billion, of which 10 billion goes to subsidies. The money that they pay on quantitative easing, effectively, that is, they pay interest to private banks on money they created out of thin air, which is the same as my printing a £5 note, giving it to you, and then paying you interest on it. No other country in the world does this. And it is effectively the Bank of England corruptly, and for all intents and purposes, is or should be illegally giving 35 billion pounds of money that comes in to their friends in private banks. That's a total of 65 billion just there alone.
If I just understood what you said no other country in the world undertakes quantitative easing. Did you
No,
just
no,
say?
no. No, no other country in the world creates money out of thin air. The
Oh, they
government
do. No,
have
quantitative
then,
easing is
no,
unfortunately quite a common
no,
occurrence.
you missed the bit. No,
Ah,
all right, I'll put it the other way around. No other country in the world pays interest to private banks for money they have that the government has printed. There's
oh, they
no
do. I mean,
no
who do you think
central
who do you think
bank.
owns the central bank in America?
Sorry.
It doesn't belong to the government. It's a private investment scam by a particular group of people that I'm not able to mention.
Oh yes, yes. I know that would make you an anti something, wouldn't it?
That's
Would
what
it?
it would do.
Would
Yeah.
there's an anti or there's an ism or there's a phobia there somewhere. I do get them confused at times, which is quite worrying, especially when you're live. I think that I need to sit down and create my own personal live stream lexicon so that I have words for referring to whoever, which have not been legislated for yet. So, in effect, can't actually be illegal unless they've got that covered. So, if any of you watching know the law, perhaps you could enlighten me on that. But there have actually they have actually taken a lot of measures in just 2 months, and all of them very, very sinister.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean,
Very,
we haven't actually just mentioned, even briefly, the proposed new legislation on smoking.
yeah.
Uh, there's another one for the
Oh, which
books, isn't it?
reminds me, I'll have a just. As I don't smoke, I'm doing this purely in support of the smokers out there. Go
Well,
ahead.
well, I do all I can to support them, I have to say. But why is it? Smoking in pubs was banned for what was it?
2007,
14 years.
17 years ago now.
Um, and virtually killed the social atmosphere in pubs. I mean, they then really became restaurants. They had to become restaurants because the drinkers had stopped going there. And the smokers that did go, because like most uh, or many smokers, we only really tend to smoke when we have a drink. And as we're fairly gregarious people, and we like to go out and meet people and have an argument with people about politics and the like. We go down to the pub to have a bit of a barney, have a few drinks, and then go home mates. But all that has stopped. We're all becoming, or many people are becoming, more and more insular. You don't get, and you'll see people now in pubs and restaurants, and actually they don't even speak to the people that they're with. They're on their damn telephones, looking at their telephones. It's unbelievable. My friends here actually they laugh at me quite a lot of the time. I'm not surprised that they do that, but I actually go out sometimes without my telephone because I don't want my telephone with me. I've gone out to socialize. I don't need my telephone with me when I've gone out to socialize. I want to go and talk to somebody. I want to have a bit of a laugh and joke. I want to argue with them. I want to punch them sometimes. But we all go home friends afterwards, and it's just stopped happening. And this is a plan. I'm sure it's a plan by the powers
It
that
has
be.
to be, and it's not about smoking. As I said when we were talking previously, I'm not sure, maybe it was before we went live. 17 years since they banned smoking in pubs, it changed the way of life for people in this country. And whereas prior to that, you'd go into a pub, get a drink, light a cigarette, pick on somebody. If you couldn't find any friends, you'd strike up a conversation with somebody you've seen before, or even a total stranger. Um, your best night would be if you could actually sit and have a debate with the friend you love to hate, who you really, you love that friend to bits, but you just like to whack them with a Labour Party manifesto. Um, that doesn't happen anymore. So people then changed their lifestyle and began to drink at home. But it's not the drinking at home per se, it is in the change in the structure of drinking, the manner in which people began to drink at home, meaning that people began to drink more and more often as they were then beginning to drink at home where it cost them less, etc. And it wasn't something they did when they went out, it was something they did every time they went to the fridge. And what has happened, it's the alcohol related issues have increased exponentially. People's mental health has deteriorated exponentially. Socializing has suffered seriously. If you look at many young people nowadays, they don't even know how to socialize. It's or how to have a debate. They're okay while everybody's on the same page, but when you disagree with anybody now, they don't actually engage in a debate. They simply just resort to name calling, and that's where all those words come.
Threats
Your
and
phone
violence.
is
That's what they resort to. Threats
sorry.
and violence.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And this is just going to make it worse. But it's about control. It is about Marxism because it's the thin end of the wedge. Then it will be what? Eating meat, driving down the street. They've destroyed the pleasure of going for a drive for everybody anyway. I mean, who really now enjoys getting in their car and going for a drive on a Sunday afternoon? Because all how can you have a relaxing drive out in the country or wherever if all you're worried about is the next variable speed limit, the next mobile speed camera, the next low traffic zone, the next venturing into a ULEZ area. I mean, it's not just London now. There's one in central Birmingham, there's one in Glasgow, and I'm sure we'll be
Manchester, I think. So.
we'll be seeing many more. And it is about control, and it is very damaging. And I am surprised how people have are managing to just stay quiet for the moment. We know that things got out of hand a few weeks ago, but for the main part, a lot of that wasn't political. A lot was. It was people expressing their anger. But see, when people are pushed too far, then what happens is that when they snap, they can behave or react or act in ways that they wouldn't normally react, whether that is violence, whether that is vandalism, whatever it may be. And people are being pushed to breaking point. But for the first time in many years now, the young people coming through, I don't know what the latest called, because we've got the Generation X, the millennials, and then we've got the Zoomers, as they call them. I don't know who the next ones after that are, but basically your 14, 15 to 18, 19 year olds, you'd be surprised, funnily enough, despite all of the indoctrination through the education system, that they are resisting and they're seeing through it. And you'd be amazed how many of these young people actually would vote reform. You'd be amazed how many of them actually despise the Uni Party, and they are sick to death of having all of this nonsense, political, sexual, pronouns, God knows what, hurled at them through school. It's become so blatantly obvious that it's not even subtle anymore, and the children can see through it. And these young people are going to rebel. They're not going to put up with this.
Well, you actually wonder who actually forces this nonsense through the educational system, don't you? I mean, who is actually doing this? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, does it? I
No,
mean,
but it must be
I,
coming
most
from.
people, I don't care if you want to have your penis chopped off and call yourself a woman. It's no skin off my nose, so to speak.
Pardon the.
Um, but and likewise, if a woman wants to be a man, I mean that's entirely up to them. And if you want to be, think of yourself and define yourself as a cabbage, I'm sure you're probably right, and you deserve to be called a cabbage. But it shouldn't be forced on other people, and to be educated about it. Well, what education do you actually need? The country doesn't need more of that sort of education. People really need to be have it explained to them what the word empathy means. You want to be empathetic towards people's own views. Everyone's entitled to have their own views and beliefs, no matter how wrong they might be. They should be allowed that. But to have the situation where you're not allowed to criticize those people is a nonsense, because you should be allowed to criticize, because that opens up another form of debate. You don't have to fight somebody over disagreeing with somebody over something, but you can have a strong discussion about it. Um, you know, I find it quite intolerable the way these things are being forced onto youngsters in particular through the education system. And I don't really know how it's being forced through, where this urge to force this strange education onto people is coming from.
Mm.
Do you know where it's
Well,
coming from?
it must be coming from high up because they are anybody who contradicts the narrative. Just literally a few weeks ago, there was a teacher who misgendered a pupil, and he had never had a bad word said about him. A lifetime of perfect service in his mid 50s, and basically by the time they're finished with him he can never teach again. And here we have a question now, or comment now from Sodov. The problem is we are being stopped doing anything. A man arrested for just standing watching. Those who's going to protest, who's going to protest if fear of in fear of arrest. And we've had this. We've had them arrest people for standing watching a protest or riot. We have had a woman arrested for silently praying in her head near an abortion clinic. We have people arrested
She
for.
obviously was crazy, of course, but there we are. Yeah, it's how did they know she was praying, for God's sake?
Well, I don't know. They must have asked her, and she must have admitted that she
Did
was
she
saying.
undergo a mind probe?
Yeah, well, she must. I assume she must have admitted it. Keep in mind that nearly everybody who's going to prison at the moment for these trivial offences, they're all pleading guilty. They're somehow what they've done is they have literally hauled in as many as possible and bullied them into pleading guilty, threatened them that if they don't plead guilty and they will charge them with this and this and this. And keep in mind that anything to do with a riot um, carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. So anybody who was anywhere near a riot who could be implicated as having been involved effectively could be threatened that they face up to 10 years in prison. So they bully them to plead guilty for something, for a lesser charge. And then what they do is they then highlight to the public something they said on social media to make it appear that that's what they went to prison for. So here's a classic one. There was a crime committed. a few weeks ago, and people everywhere were speculating, and many people were expressing as an opinion it was so and so who was so and so and so and so. Now, the government has gaslighted everybody with this because they're saying that these people incited the violence and the riots, because people forget after the event that the riots had started after we knew the identity or alleged identity of the offender. Um, but effectively, the only if I were to put if I were to say publicly that Mickey Mouse did this and this and this, and I believed he's guilty of this offence, is that inciting violence? And if there is an offended party, that offended party would be Mickey Mouse, for example, who would literally have an issue with being incorrectly named as the perpetrator of a crime when he was in fact innocent. It's not for anybody else to say. We have somebody online here. There's this movement. It's called Hope Not Hate. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, and it's run by somebody called Nick Lowles, who is um, anything lefty, he supports it, and anything that's anywhere near the centre or beyond is far right for him. And not that long ago, he actually put up a post that there was an acid attack perpetrated against a certain demographic in Manchester, I believe. And the next day, he just put, "Oh, I was mistaken." But he never said, "It's my opinion." He never said, "Allegedly." He said, "This is happening." But people like him, who are on the left side of the spectrum, and this left and right does my head in because it's sort of polarizing everybody, makes it feel that they're so far apart. But what people don't realize is the far left and the far right, it's not linear, it's a circle. Um,
But interestingly, Anthony, your earlier comments did remind me of the fact that I do have a master plan to help the aged in the UK. I can actually sort out all of their heating, lighting, eating, and bathing requirements in one foul swoop.
how's that then?
Well, I'm going to have them organize riots throughout the country. They will then be arrested. They will resist arrest. They will violently smash their walking canes across the streets of their cities. They'll be arrested. They'll refuse to pay any fines. They'll go to prison where they'll receive 3 square meals a day, free heating, free lighting, no need to pay television licenses, and they can have a very comfortable winter inside.
Or we could arrange to put them on dinghies in Calais and instruct them to tear up their passports halfway across the
Come
channel.
in as illegals.
Yeah, absolutely. Then they wouldn't go to prison. Then they'd go straight to four-star hotels. They would be protected. Anybody who objects would be labelled far right, and they'd even be given
Either
phone.
way, they're stunning plans, and we should undertake to help them
Mm,
immediately. Yeah.
yes, we've just done this live on air. Instigating rebellion on a mass scale. Um,
Well, they've got to come and get me. You're easier to find.
oh, thank you for that. Thank you very, very much for that. Sod off. Aren't we now arresting more political prisoners than Putin? That's some going in 8 weeks. Isn't it just? And he says, I assume you're a he, sorry, he or she. Oh, God, I never know what pronouns to use nowadays. I can sort out their heating. I can sort their heating problem out too. Absolutely. Um, I think things will not continue as they are. On the one hand, we've got these nutters who haven't got a clue, who will be running around like headless chickens. In fact, the budget is feared to be so drastic that they are laying the foundations for it from now. So that gives you some indication of how bad it's going to be. And on the other hand, people have been silenced. They've not simply put their tools down and just withdrawn quietly and getting on with their lives. They are literally silenced because they have been threatened and gagged, and they are now literally, this is a melting pot now, which will invariably explode at some point. How that happens or when, I really, really don't know. What do you think? Good evening, Tracy. Ray says, I know a good barrister if you two need one. Thank you very much, Ray. Yeah, thank you very much, Ray. Well, I'll be the one needing the barrister. Meanwhile, this deserter will simply go out for kofta kebab and an Fez beer, uh,
And a cigarette.
and a cigarette, and a cigarette. I'm so tempted now to just have one on principle, and I don't know if that's my political head or if it is my ex-smoker's head. You know, my little nicotine monster saying, "Go on, this is an excuse. You can have one now, and you can pretend you're doing it. You're smoking to support others." Uh, uh, and yes. Anyway, so I think that I think that for the moment, people need to be very, very careful. I am trying to be careful, but to be honest, I'm not comfortable to just shut up and go away because somebody needs to speak up. And you know, there isn't that many people who are openly speaking up now. You'd be amazed in the order of things how few there are. And that really is worrying. We have had major major figures. When I say major figures, people with hundreds of thousands of followers effect just literally take everything down and stop for the time being. This is what this country is coming to. And when it reaches that point, and we haven't even touched on many other sinister events that are happening that I have to be really, really careful to talk about openly online now. And that's ridiculous because that goes against my grain. We should be able to say, you are up to this and this and this. But that, I'm afraid, is the England that has gone and is now little more than a distant memory for those of us old enough to remember when England was England. And the only time we ever see that now is if we watch the Sweeney or Minder or something along those lines, because you just wouldn't recognise this country anymore.
Well, I remember there was a comedy series years ago where this I can't remember that this black couple lived obviously next to a white couple, and they both used to call each other the most horrendous
Oh,
names.
love thy neighbour.
Love thy neighbor.
Yes.
And but they got on like a house on fire, really. But I mean, they just used to throw these wild sort of comments at each other, and everybody laughed at it because everybody knew it was just meant to be. Well, most normal people knew it was meant to be just a bit of fun,
Yes,
which it was.
yes, but when we have a structure where an 8-year-old white boy is told, you are guilty, you owe, you are bad, your heritage is built on slavery, on evil, on theft, on plundering, etc. And when they say, they turn to the black boy and they say, you are the victim, you have been wronged, you are entitled, etc. How do they expect to create a cohesive society?
Well, they don't. It's impossible, actually. The whole thing is crazy. But I mean, I did see one of your posts actually about slavery and reparations and
Oh,
what a
you
great
commented.
job
Yes, yes,
the
you commented.
British had done. And in a way, you were correct, but I think you missed the bigger picture on that point. The British government uh, did bugger all except look after their own interests, because at that time, most of the government were slave owners and paid themselves millions of pounds in compensation for the loss of slaves. So it was the British taxpayer who actually rewarded the British elite for getting rid of their slaves. And now, of course, there's talk about reparations to black African countries for slavery. And who's going to be asked to pay this but the British taxpayer? Well, of course, it should be the ex slave owning families that should be paying the reparations, because they still come from multi billionaire landowning families. But interestingly, of course, it wasn't the British that invented slavery. Slavery had been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And most of it was actually done between different black nations and cultures there. So it's a very big story, really. A complicated story.
Well, yeah. Obviously, before the British Empire, we're only talking in the last few hundred years. Prior to that was the Ottomans, and in actual fact, the Ottomans took more slaves than the whole of Europe throughout their history put together. Prior to that, we had we had we had the Romans, we had the ancient Greeks, we had the Egyptians. They all took slaves, um, and slavery still goes on today in certain parts of the world, and it must be stopped. So to actually just pick on one nation and make people now grow up feeling a sense of guilt for something that they didn't do is inherently wrong. And it is not done with a moral compass in mind, it is done with an agenda in mind.
Well, it's another control and fear situation, isn't it?
uh, Beyond that, it is about destroying a culture and a society from its foundations, because there are certain people out there who continually, at every opportunity, will try to raise doubt about our past, our heritage, something that's written in the Bible, etc., etc., etc. But keep in mind that it's not allowed the other way round. So what's happening is there is this element of wishy-washy people who don't know anything about their own culture, their own faith, their own background, who are allow themselves to be manipulated. It is almost, see, once you chip at the foundations, it is almost like a massive game of demographic Jenga. You take out a brick here and you take out a brick here and you chip away at this one until you can take that one out. And everything looks the same, but one day somebody pulls one brick out, and that one brick is the one that will result in everything coming tumbling down. That's basically what is happening. These people, supported by our leaders, are playing demographic Jenga with our entire society. And I could go further than that, but it's probably best that I don't.
It could be a conspiracy theory.
It could be. It could be. Now, you like those, don't you, Jack? Yes. Um, uh, he's just waiting. Sodov says he's just waiting for Farage to say something. Branding far right party and ban reform. Well, actually, you are correct there. Now, um, I do feel that Farage and well, actually, Antis have been a little more reserved than I expected since they entered Parliament, but I can understand why, because they were trying to push. I'm not sure if you're aware, Jack, when we had the riots, mainstream media were referring to them as the Farage riots, trying to make it stick. This is how threatened these
What are you
people are.
saying? It was just another Farrago. Yes, well, he's been involved in many of those, of course.
But it had
And
absolutely nothing to do with him because, first of all, it was nothing to do with Farage and reform anyway. But Farage has never, ever said one word to encourage social unrest.
I
He,
want to know why Farage, who was totally against the European Union, apparently, um, his wife is German and his children have German passports. What? I don't know.
uh, because being against the European Union, it's got nothing to do with being against Europe. I despise the European Union. I consider it to be a horrid, corrupt, autocratic, unelected, insidious cultural
Well,
Marxist.
they are elected, of course. I think you mean the bureaucracy behind them that tend to control everything.
Those who make the decisions behind the scenes are unelected, and there's not even minutes of their meetings kept. Unelected, unaccountable. I That has nothing to do with our love of Europe as nations. They are not the same, and this is the classic mistake: trying to compare anti-EU with being against Europe. Europe and every country in it. Well, there is one that I'm not so keen on, but you'll probably guess which one that is. But anyway, Europe and the nations within it are, as far as I'm concerned, they're all beautiful, all with their independent cultures, heritage, history, and they are all capitulating to the agenda that is happening now. And as I said, this is not just the UK. This demographic Jenga is being replicated in every country in Europe, possibly with the exception of Poland and Hungary, of course. Um, and it's now a case of which brick is going to be the one that's going to bring the whole thing tumbling down, in which country is going to be first. Not that long ago, it looked like it looked like uh, Belgium or France would be one of the first ones to fall. But in the last few years, we have seen things accelerate so much in the UK and in Cyprus, I might say, that it could be one of those countries that first falls. In fact, in Cyprus, the indigenous population is probably already outnumbered. In the north, they're outnumbered. In the occupied area, they're occupied what, 4-1 or 5-1?
In what? In sorry, in what area did you say?
In 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 the occupied area.
Well, we don't call it the occupied area, do we, actually? Because that isn't even factually correct.
Oh, I'm
That
so
is just an inflammatory remark
sorry.
made by some people who live on the other side of the island.
So what do we refer it to keep you happy in a non-inflammatory way?
Well, we would say, what would we say? We would say that they were the, well, I don't know, what would we say? Well, they were, they were the people. You see, whatever you say is inflammatory to somebody, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so on this particular occasion, on
All
this
right, can we just
particular,
call it the other side? Yes, for now.
the other side,
On
yes.
the other side, how what ratio are the Turkish Cypriots? And I actually don't like using that. I prefer to just say Cypriots and Cypriots. But let's just say,
Well, they're all Cypriots. It doesn't matter what language they speak.
but what what ratio would you say they're outnumbered?
Oh God, I would imagine the indigenous population would be lucky if they represent 25% of the population.
Okay, 4-1.
Yeah.
And keep in mind the massive influx that there's been in the last 3 or 4 years throughout the whole island. Um, indigenous Cypriots, let's just call it that way, indigenous Cypriots throughout Cyprus, and it's not just Greek, there's Turkish, there's Armenian, there's Maronites as well, amongst others, are actually bordering on being outnumbered already, actually. We're not far off it. So it's scary, but as I said, I can see that something drastic will happen in one of these countries in the near future. Which one will be first? I don't know, because, as I said, just in the last 4 or 5 years, things in the UK have accelerated to such a degree, and it's not just the numbers, it is the laws and regulations and all the implications, legal implications behind everything, the agenda behind everything that have become terrifying. And to be honest, most people in this country now feel that they are uh, being treated uh, as the
Well,
enemy.
second-class citizens in their own country, well, absolutely. And in some respects, they are, because we've all heard of in the well, most of us have heard of the some of the terrible things that go on in the UK by different ethnic groups within the UK. I'm talking about the grooming of youngsters for various sexual perversions, etc. And of course, the police actually know of this activity going on, and are too frightened, literally too frightened, to do anything for fear of causing an uprising amongst that community. Um, Again, it's because everybody is so frightened of upsetting somebody. When does it ever stop? You
It
know,
won't stop because we're at the point now, and this is only going to get worse as he brings in more laws. Effectively, we won't be able to question a certain demographic, but they will be able to spew all of the contempt and hate that they want and get
it's
away with
it's
it.
a crazy situation, absolutely
It
crazy.
is. And sort of now ask a question: do you think Labour MPs will turn against two-tier Keir? Well, Labour actually doesn't have a history of deposing their leaders like the Conservatives do. The Conservatives tend to be more ruthless. As you're aware, they've done it many times. But um, I think that they have set traps for themselves. Uh, Keir set a trap for Angela Rayner with this house building target: 1.5 million homes in 5 years, 300,000 per year, which is 6,000 per week. And they're 8, 9 weeks into it, and the backlog is building up. And if you have been uh, watching Parliament at any point, a couple of weeks ago, Kemi Badenoch pointed this out to a very nervous and uncomfortable looking Angela Rayner, that she has been set up. And at some point in the future, or any time of Starmer's choosing, he, or whenever it does become an issue, he will then allow her to take the fall for it and get rid of her in one go, because I really don't think he wants her there.
Well, isn't
Um,
that a sign of a good leader, actually?
Sorry?
Isn't that the sign of a good leader?
If it is, if it, yes, this sort of treachery could be part of great leadership, but great leadership is just that word. It is leadership. The greatest leaders have people who volunteer to lay their lives down for them, not people who they shoot because they won't do as they're told. And this brings us back to one of my favourite um, writers that I often refer to, and that's Aldous Huxley. And in one of his famous speeches, he said, "Even the most totalitarian of societies requires some measure of complicity from the citizens to succeed, because once citizens are pushed too far, to the point where they no longer care, the totalitarian society will invariably collapse." This is why then he actually wrote the book Brave New World, where the world was controlled through hedonism by simply just turning people into ruminating herbivores who have no rhyme or reason to their lives, and sit there simply. It's almost like an outtake from the Time Machine where he goes to the future, and you have the people who are literally just turned into cows, and they are there for the benefit and at the mercy of the warlocks. This
Well,
is
that's exactly what's happened and happening across the world, isn't it? And certainly in the UK. I mean, all such a big proportion of the population, they just want to watch they cheer, they pay ridiculous amounts of money to watch footballers play. I can't remember, there was the Manchester City player, that Egyptian guy, Mo Salah. He's paid £350,000 a week. Well, how on earth is anybody deserving of such a salary for playing football? It's beyond my, it really is beyond my comprehension. And you've got the average working man. Well, I don't know what the average wage in the UK is now, around about £30,000, something like that. Um, well, he's paying something like, in at most Premier League football clubs, the best part of £10,000 for a season ticket. Well, are they crazy or what? I mean, there's something, to me, it just beggars belief. I can't get my head around it. To go and watch a test match now, the cheapest test match ticket is around about £90, something like that. Well, it's absolutely crazy. I mean, the whole situation is
Oh,
out of
absolutely,
control.
absolutely. Not only are
Oh, hang on.
people.
What's this awful duo that's just got back together? Those singing clowns. What are they called? They're just having a world tour, which is only around the UK.
Oh, yeah. What was it? Oasis.
Yes. Well, £900 a ticket.
I
Are
know.
they? Are they absolutely out of their minds?
People are paying it.
Am I out of my mind or are they out of theirs? I really wonder. I'm not sure.
Well, Ray Sims says the silence video, sorry, by Tommy Robertson exposes everything about the child grooming gangs in the UK. It's a real eye opener. Banned. He was actually arrested for screening it. Um, Allegedly, it can be found, and allegedly, you can find it if you look. But I can't tell you where to look for it. So you need to look for yourselves if it is available anywhere, allegedly. Uh, but anyway, and sod off again. And why is two tiers so behind the Muslims? It's not normal behaviour to destroy your own country. Is it the votes he's after, or some sort of fetish, or it's part of? Yes. Well, um, as I said earlier, and Farage was right. At the election, we did not vote for leaders, we voted for middle management. And if you've actually seen the interaction between Rishi Sunak and Starmer, in certain little glimpses we've had, it actually makes you feel sick, because these are not two adversaries, these are people on the same team, and one of them has laid the foundations for the other. It is almost as though it is almost as though um, Sunak came to destroy everything, including the Conservative Party, to lay the foundations for the Antichrist in person to come along and finish the job. And that's exactly what is happening, I'm afraid. Uh, which videos that sort of is it on YouTube? It's not on YouTube. I gather there's another platform that I heard that it might be on, but I'm not certain and I can't tell you. Um, Oasis, yes. I never liked them then, anyway, to be
Well, no,
honest.
I never liked them then either. But I mean, how could anybody justify those ticket prices? I mean,
Oh, right. Sorry, I just missed something here. I'm so sorry, guys. Just a moment. Maggie, policewoman on vid tells you all about it. Yes, yes. Again, you could always, I suppose, message each other to avoid me saying anything that will upset our duly elected leader. But I think that what we need to do now is we need to be very, very careful, and it's it's almost difficult to comply with the law at the moment. You may have witnessed that embarrassing moment in Parliament when Lee Anderson asked Angela Rayner to define Islamophobia as the Labour Party would legally define it, and she didn't know. She came back with, "We will revert back to you in due course." So, this is the government who is encouraging all of these left wing nutters to come out with this term, but they don't actually know what it means. And yet, anybody who stands up for freedom, trust me, I've done it. I've got some idiot that I seem to have inherited since standing at the election, following me around everywhere, posting copies of alleged fake tweets that uh, that I am supposed to have made years ago, and effectively now, I do know who he is, and I'm going to have to go through a legal route to actually get this guy off my back. He's not doing me any harm because all of my business associates know exactly what his game is. But this is the fanaticism, the left wing Marxist, toxic left fanaticism that this administration has nurtured and encouraged. And for a prime minister to stand up and to call anybody who objects to what he is doing far right, he insulted a nation. He insulted every decent citizen in this nation with those words. And then he has the nerve to say that people were out there angry because somebody said something on some social media post. People are beyond that now. They see through that now.
mind you, you're my only friend that I know of that's gained a stalker. You must have done something right.
It's not even a woman. Unbelievable. I stood for Parliament. I was never involved in a scandal with a lady. No female stalker. What I have got is some misfit with curly hair. That's what I've got. Um, but never mind. It shows that I made an impact, and that's what I wanted to do. Because if I were just going to stand and simply just repeat, well, if you vote for reform, we're going to raise the tax to £20,000, the threshold. We're going to increase the VAT to so much. We're going to raise the threshold for corporation. Um, what would that do? The whole point is, I stood to pick a fight, to raise questions, to raise arguments, and to do my bit. And if some people don't like it, well, they can go take a running jump, because I'm not here to say what people want to hear. I didn't stand to literally read the people and say what I think they're going to like just to get myself into Parliament. It would be a huge honour to be able to serve in Parliament. But guess what? I'm not prepared to sell my soul to get there. And if it means that my way of saying things is not good enough for some people, um, on any side of the divide, then tough. I don't care. I don't care whether I stand or not, or whether I win or not. If I stand, I will stand on what I believe. And if the fact that I'm going to say things directly doesn't suit, then you know what? I don't care, because I think there are far too many people prostituting themselves, for others and for the narrative, and this is why we're in the mess that we're in. And first and foremost, what matters to me is democracy and people having the vote, not just the vote, but people being engaged, not just at each election, but with every important decision within a country. We have the means to do that now very easily. Why on earth we have postal votes in this day and age, I really, really don't know. We don't need that. And all important issues, and there's not that many of them in a year. Um, I believe that the public should be able to log into their .gov account and vote, because that would be democracy. We're supposed to have representative democracy because we can't have direct democracy because there are too many people. Who literally represents their voters? Tell me an MP who represents their constituents anywhere in this country. It is a disgrace. It is an insult to call this country democratic anymore.
Well, I think that's always been the case, personally. MPs represent themselves and their own interests, and as I say, I go back to one of my first questions: how they go in as general run-of-the-mill guys, general run-of-the-mill jobs, and they come out millionaires. They're just all working towards their next brown envelope.
Absolutely, but like I said, it has been an experience though, Jack, and I suppose we'll go after this because we've been waffling on for ages. But never mind. When I first told you I was going to stand last year, I was going to stand as an independent, as you know. It was just me. I just wanted to just get up and just say, "You lot are crap," effectively. And then when I started reading through the the Reform Party policies, and I agreed with this, and I agreed with this, and I agreed with that, I then joined them, and I quite proudly stood for them. But what began as my journey, my voice, my argument, my mission, suddenly began to change, because once the election got going, all of these people began to contact me, and all of them in despair, all of them at their wits' end, all of them disillusioned with our leadership, our political structure, you name it. And then it changed, because it wasn't about me anymore, it was about them. And that's why after the election, I was so passionate about the fact that we've got the election out of the way, we must now be democratic. And if I am to stand for this constituency again, I would only consider it if every single Reform member were to vote for me, and that they should have a choice. And if they choose somebody else, that's absolutely fine. I want to see democracy being done, because it is the erosion of democracy that has allowed these monsters that pull the strings from behind the scenes to steer not just our country, but most of the world into these dark territory where we are heading now. You may speak, Jack.
Well, I didn't like to. I thought you were on a roll. Well, but no, well, I mean, I can't really disagree with anything you said there.
Well,
I hold out
I, th- I,
little.
I think you've done a pathetic job of disagreeing with me this evening. I'm very, very disappointed with you, my ardent devil's advocate, and all you've done most of the night is agree with me. I
Well,
mean,
it's
these
very
people,
difficult to disagree with
these
common
people are
sense.
going to start booing you in a little while if you don't.
But
actually-
it's very difficult to disagree with common sense statements.
Isn't it?
And what's frightening really is that so many people think the same as us, but they're too, because of what we've spoken about, they're often too frightened really to stand up and say these things, because they think that they're going to be attacked by all these various woke people, whatever this term
Well,
woke
I
means.
think that the really aggressive ones, they call them now the Antifa. We have an Antifa in England now. And anything that contradicts the narrative, They descend on you like vultures. And what these weirdos have successfully managed to achieve is they have managed to convince the majority that they're the minority. So people fear speaking out because they think that their friends and neighbors and workmates are going to literally be shocked. And the problem is, if they do speak out, their friends and neighbors and colleagues probably will pretend to be shocked because they also think that if they don't pretend to be shocked, that they will also be associated with this person who is obviously far right. This is where we're at the moment. But when the majority, and when I say the majority, we are talking the 80% plus, realize that they are the majority and that they do hold the power. The power is not held by these misfits in Parliament. The power is held by the people. It's just that they don't know it. We're back to that meme that you often see on Facebook where you have the people standing on a plank and the politicians right on the end of the plank, and they
Yes,
are listening to him in fear. But all they have to do is
it's step off the plank. Absolutely.
he will fall.
Yeah.
And that's
Because you talk about Aldous Huxley being one of your great, you were a great admirer of Aldous Huxley, and he was a great writer and had an awful lot of common sense. Well, funny enough, I've never really been a great supporter of socialist ideals, but one of my favorite writers was George Orwell. I mean, and so many of his books are summing up what's going on now. Animal Farm and, of course, 1984. Both of these books actually sum up exactly what is going on today.
well, did you know that Aldous Huxley was one of George Orwell's teachers?
Yes, I did.
And Brave New World, I would argue, precedes 1984 in reality. For 1984, the totalitarian society to be implemented, you must first desensitize society, which is what happened. People allow people to overdose on whatever it is that will release their endorphins, their mobile phones, Facebook, alcohol, drugs, inappropriate material, whatever it is. And that has what happened erode morality, erode culture, erode respect, erode responsibility to our family, our friends, and our ancestors, and just create fear of the state. That is what is happening. It is about turning moral citizens into ruminating herbivores. Once they're all ruminating herbivores, then they can be rounded up, controlled in a 1984 style world for and held in place for the warlocks. That's effectively what's happening. So they're both right. It's just one precedes the other. You need to go through Brave New World to get to 1984. That's what I believe.
Quite, yeah.
And on that note, shall we call it a night until next time?
I think so.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jack. And for everybody who's joined us, thank you very much. I know we've gone on for ages, but to be honest, the way that we see it is we're sat in a pub smoking.
And drinking.
Oh, and drinking as well. You extreme right wing fanatic, you. Jack, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully,
It's been a
you join
pleasure.
me in soon. We'll think of another topic maybe next week. To everybody who has joined, I hope that you've enjoyed it and we haven't talked you to death or bored you to death, and hopefully we haven't broken any law in the meantime. Who knows?
We'll find out.
Find out soon enough. I think there's a knock at the door, by the way. Anyway, bye bye for now. See you soon. Bye.
It's good night from me.